it is important to be able to let the government obtain data, because at the end of the day, it's our information to actually should be looked at as a public resource. But at the same time, there's the conversation, the reality of this information getting into the wrong hands, this information being utilized in the wrong ways. Then convert this information into now biometrics, as we're talking about. And what is being utilized to identify you are things that you really can't replace. If, for instance, I got a bad name online, worst case scenario, go change your name. If, let's say, my PIN number, or in an environment like the United States, your social security number gets compromised to the point that it's really affecting your life, you can change that number. But what happens when your fingerprints are taken in the wrong manner or even matched to the wrong identity? Do we cut off your fingers? What happens within that space? But then at the same time, all this information is required for you to be able to get the certain services that you need. So for me, I look at it in terms of there has to be a balance and responsibility has to be harnessed. Quite a bit of education where someone is feeling safe and understanding that the person that they're interacting with is actually working for their good and not necessarily to harm them. That is my view.
Thanks, Liz. That's a very good point you've pulled there, in that part of the information that is being gathered and being sourced is supposed to effectively make the government be able to serve us. And on this, we have a buzz in Kenya right now on e-citizen, automation, digitalization. We have now, we are now going to the digitalization of the education sector. I want to pull Moses and ask you, as we are doing this, how secure are we? Or what should be done to make sure that what we give, or the information that we give, is secure and it is used for the purpose that it was intended to?
Thank you very much. I'll have to maybe just dive straight into the understanding around privacy and cybersecurity and the voluminous amount of data that we are collecting every other day. As my colleague here has indicated, that it's necessary for public service goods and provision of services in our communities, and it's necessary that we do this. The problem, however, comes in where we draw the line between what is public and what's private, and how to secure whatever is deemed as both private or public. And we have to start off from the Constitution. Article 31. Article 31 of the Constitution is clear. The drafters had in mind the idea of privacy, not just privacy in the offline communities, but also in the digital spaces. And especially part C and D is very important. It's very clear on the principle of necessity. It's not just about collecting data. It's about collecting data when it's absolutely necessary that you must collect that data. It's not just a question of collect it all. And I guess that's where we start the idea about cybersecurity, because the moment you take too much, you risk redundancy in the data that you're collecting, so that you are overwhelmed in the collection and the management and the processing of data, that you don't have time to look through the dynamics, the patterns that this gives. The year 2014, Kenya signed, around June, Kenya signed the African Union Convention and promised the members of the African Union in the fraternity that they would go ahead and institute policies and legal frameworks that actually speak to cybersecurity, personal data processing, and e-commerce. But if you look at chapter 2, it's a very broad topic, and it talks about data processing. That's year 2014. Of course, it had started some time back. It establishes a very important component, which is an independent office that works only around privacy and data processing, so that it can streamline all these organizations that are collecting data. So when you think about the points at which you drop your data, the points at which you're giving, say you're buying an airline ticket, and you ask like who is your phone number, your name, where you're going, where you work, and all those kind of details. Then the next minute, you're booking a hotel and you are leaving lots of your data. You're specifically targeting yourself. You're giving so much information around the targeting, and it's so easy to be targeted. It's so easy to identify you in whatever you're doing. Now, think about the biometrics, which actually even increases the level around which you can be identified, because this is physical, and your physical, fingerprints, there's no way you can make up fingerprints unless you are really committed, and if so, there are still ways that you can detect that, or you can triangulate the sources of the data and you can be identified. Now, the way I wanted to capture that is to see how the increasingly the government and these organizations, actually supra organization, I would say, a company like an ISP, internet service provider, or your phone company, or your operating system provider, they have so much data around you, but chances are you don't have control or any information about how they treat this data. Now, when we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about not just the integrity of the data and how to keep that data secure. It's also about how do we bounce back in case of an attack, because most definitely you will be hit. Most definitely there will be leaks. There will be an employee who will leak the data. There will be a system failure. There will be a hack, or how do you bounce back? And if your data is stored, say, somewhere in California, you have to instigate a mutual legal agreement procedure, and it might take quite some time. These are the questions that probably we could be asking about our cybersecurity. Are we even in control of our cybersecurity, in the sense that the software layers and the hosting options that we have are most likely in the hands of the private sector, and could be a multinational? Fine, well, that's how the internet is organized. But as a government, when we are collecting such sensitive data that can identify the person, how sure are we that we can talk about securing our own? You cannot secure that which you don't control. So the first step is to know, are we in control of the software layer? And how do we work with private organizations that hold our data, so that when we talk about securing this data that we are collecting around, then we can be talking about at least an attempt, not just to secure the integrity of the data, but in case of a hack, we can jump back, and the resilience that comes with that, and the functional integrity. So maybe we will talk much further about this, but maybe I can give the mic back. So.
Thank you very much, Moses. I want to pull Richard on this.
Thank you so much, Arthur. It's an interesting question because, number one, I think due to the nature of government and other private sector entities that, due to the kind of mandates they have, it is inevitable that they'll have to collect data. We can't have a situation where you put a blanket moratorium saying that nobody shall collect data from anybody. The entire world would grind to a halt. So I think, as you rightfully put it, what are the kind of laws we have and policies around data security? Now, in Kenya, unfortunately, we are at what can I say? We are at a disadvantage at that point, because apart from the usual international conventions that I think we have become signatories to do with privacy and data security, the only other provisions we have really in Kenyan law explicitly is provisions for privacy, provisions on privacy. That is Article 31. And otherwise, apart from that, what has been guiding us is the common law principles on confidentiality. So I don't think there's any other law, unless my colleague here would think there's something else governing us. Do you?
Well,
Yep.
In 2013, the CIC drafted a bill to give life to Article 31, and it was data processing bill. Unfortunately, it has never seen light of the day.
That's a good one. I mean, it's good for us to know that even when you give your information, the recourse is on a gentleman understanding. If I got it, if I got it very well, I mean, it is the owners of the hotel to make sure that your passport is not known, or it's the owners of your service, internet service provider, to make sure that the details that you give them are always private to that extent. And this draws me to Livingston. Livingston, in your area of interaction, you deal with key accounts. And I mean, this calls for a lot of attention to them. This calls for you being proactive on a day-to-day basis with their requirements and the like. And this goes into, for us to feel that the data that we are putting forthright to the general domain and to the gadgets that you sell, because I would say 100% or 99% of the people who are inside here are using the gadgets from HP that you sell. What are you doing as HP to make sure that we are safe?
Thank you very much. And it's a good topic in terms of information. Sometimes we give away information without knowing where it's going. And the first place that should stun anybody is that all of a sudden you start getting a lot of advertising on your phone when you did not request for any advertising. So on the private side, we collect a lot of information as an organization. I handle strategic accounts. There are not many. For those of us who handle strategic accounts within the organization, I work for HP. HP is a known large organization, and we collect information. The purposes for which we collect information are diverse. But for me, from my customers, the information I collect is supposed to be able to help us profile those customers so that we can be able to provide services that are relevant or suitable to those customers. That is the purpose for which we collect information. We commit to the customers, of course, that their information shall not be shared without permission, including even to state agencies. Okay, private sector companies have been known to refuse to give information because, like in Kenya, we don't have any legal framework to force someone to give information. However, there are reasons why, but the opportunity is, or the reasons behind collecting information is purely to be able to deliver a service. Now, that's also what we expect, that whenever we come here and you register your passport or your ID is taken and you record it down and you sign a form, many times we don't ask ourselves why we are signing that form. We just give the information. When you go to WhatsApp, everyone wants to be on WhatsApp. You're asked to agree to certain things. How many people read those conditions before they say, I agree? Almost nobody. But these days, if you read some of those conditions, one of them says that they have the right to access your phone and change information on your phone. Nobody reads that. But imagine someone is asking for you to give him permission and you just say, I agree. And that information could be used even to incriminate you. So the point is that many times we are a bit lax with giving away our information. Within our organization, we've got a very, very tight management of information. We've got SharePoints where we share this information. And I was just, when we were brainstorming, we were talking about the laptops. He talked about the devices. And I'm happy that he believes that 95% are HP. I don't think so, but the point is that a lot of our devices, and I'll speak for HP because that's what I'm familiar with, we provide the user or the buyer with the ability to set up to 4 or even 5 levels of access security. Now, how many people have more than one, just their password? Very few people use those levels of security. We've got the card, we've got the fingerprint reader, we've got the retina sensor through your webcam, which has become a standard on notebooks, and now it's even becoming a standard on desktops. And there are BIOS level security software that is available. And then, of course, we've got your password. So all these levels, depending on what you need to access, these levels of security are supposed to prevent access to that information that you may be holding. But again, as we were talking, we said one thing, that security of anything that you have on your device is fully dependent on you, the person who has the authority to either provide that or access that information. I used to work as an auditor once upon a time when I started working. And one of the things that we were told as we were training as auditors is that if management of a company is involved in fraud, it is almost impossible to detect that fraud, because the management are the ones who are charged with the responsibility to check fraud. So if they themselves are involved in the fraud, they can't. So you have the key to your organization, and you've provided on the system, they've put there your credentials to be able to access certain key security information, or even if you're in a bank, that information is supposed to be used to be able to transfer certain monies, certain levels of amounts of money. If you decide to offer that information yourself to somebody else, so that that somebody else can access and then utilize or act as though it is you, there is very little that anyone can do to stop it. The question we say is that a lot of data that is being collected, we want to know how much is enough, and at what point does it cross from being security information to bridging into your private space. Again, a topic to be discussed here.
Thank you, Livingstone. That was very insightful. And I like the point that Livingstone has pointed out. And he has said that, and I believe in this one, that if management in an organization initiates fraud, it's very, very difficult for you or for anyone or even an auditor to come and say, oh, look here, we need to stop this. It can't stop, it can't be detected. Now, I want to pull in Mr. Muga. Mr. Muga, you are involved in registration of births and deaths. So when someone is born, I want to believe you are involved on and giving them a birth certificate. And I want to believe when someone dies, you also your office will be involved in giving them a death certificate. My question is, how much is enough? When I am applying for that birth certificate, what information is enough for you to give me that birth certificate? Do I need to come with my baptismal card? Do I need to bring the chief's letter? Because it becomes quite interesting when you want to go and apply for a birth certificate, and you are told, hey, go to the village and bring a letter from your chief. And I live in Mombasa. The last time I was in the village was probably 6-7 years ago. I go and I was sharing with my panel here that when I was picking mine, I went to our chief and I saw that the chief was the same age as me. And I'm here sent to go collect a letter from him. So probably he wasn't even there when I was born. How would he be able to give me a letter for me to go get a birth certificate? Is this information that you're asking, how much is enough? And how do you draw the line between information that the government needs and garbage?
Thank you, Chair. That's a very interesting question, perhaps a challenge to me and the organization that I represent. The question, how much is enough, I would look at it from a different perspective. And I thank Lillian particularly for helping me in my argument to advocate for more data. Because as far as some of us are concerned, particularly government, what we have is not even sufficient. And I'll give you the reason why. There are approximately 3 levels at which government collects personal legal data. You know, your biodata or bioinformation. The first level is during birth registration. That's the first point at which government collects data compulsorily. The second level is during ID registration, or when you apply for your ID. And the last level is during alien or refugee registration. Now, at birth registration level, we as a country have attained only about 62.5% registration coverage, which means that there's about 38% who do not exist in any government record, who are between the ages of 0 and 18. Perhaps when they get to 18, they could go on and apply for their ID. And the government is concerned that there's up to 38% who are not accounted for. And we sometimes, like to refer to this as the scandal of invisibility, where one is born, they live their life, God forbid they die at an early age, 18, 17, 16, and they're buried, and there's no print or record of their existence on the face of this, this earth. And therein, lies the scandal. So the first call that we have as government is we need to have complete data sets. Completeness in both in terms of numbers or statistics and in terms of quality of the data that we collect as government. As to your question on, your perspective of how much is really enough, this is really an operational issue. What happens at the very lowest level is when a birth occurs or a death occurs in a health facilities, that information is collected on the basis of a declaration that is made by the informant or by the parent, a simple declaration. The same applies for a birth or a death that occurs at home. You simply make a declaration to your local assistant chief on the death or the birth that has occurred. The instances where you need to, look for letters from your assistant chief and so on and so forth are only in the event that this birth or this death was not registered in the first place. So we refer to that as a late registration, which we are in fact discouraging. But I have some concerns myself arising from the discussions that we have had so far on sharing of the data that we collect, particularly as a government. It has just been pointed out that we hardly have any proper legislation that should guide the sharing of this data. And that is a huge concern to us as government, because government collects primary data. The data sharing that we're talking about is at a secondary, tertiary level, but that data is collected primarily by government. Before you, register for a SIM card or an M-Pesa account, you must have an ID card. I mean, that's at least a requirement, even though, compliance levels are still fairly low. And therefore, you depend on the primary registration, which is the registration that brought forth the ID, the registration that brought forth the birth certificate. We have been very keen to see the data protection and access to information bills go through, because this is what is going to help us as governments to confidently share the data that we hold in trust, data or information belonging to the public. We'll be able to share this within a legal framework. But right now we're holding a lot of data in our respective government databases, but sharing of this data is a little bit of a challenge, to us, especially those who collect primary data. The sort of data that NTSA is using, NTSA collects secondary data. They collect data from, they pull data from IPRS, they pull data from the National Registration Bureau, so they are not primary collectors of data. But again, it's a huge concern for those of us who collect data at the primary level that we don't have, as we speak, an enabling legislation framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Daniel, I mean, you've brought a very good point, and I want to draw the legal mind into this one and ask them. He talked about people, the government departments that correct primary data, and others are doing secondary, and others are doing tertiary. Many of us would agree with me that there is a lot of duplication, because I feel that when I come and it's a government directive that I should register my phone, that means I have registered my number with the primary data that Muga had corrected. That means it directly links to me. Now, when I again come to KRA and I got to have this PIN, the information that they use for them to issue the document to me is the primary data that was corrected from me, the same ID. Now, that brings me to you, and my question is, if we have the primary level, the primary correctors of data producing secondary, enabling us to get the secondary data and the tertiary data, who should be correcting this data? And does it work for you that when the public are in default to the government steps up to combine the primary, secondary, and tertiary data in order to gain what they want? And in this case, I just want to give you an example. HELB want to use NTSA so that people can pay for help. KRA want to use NTSA so that people pay taxes. If we do not have a legal framework behind that governs the sharing of data, what exactly are we getting ourselves into?
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me start off by saying that I think the one entity that knows somebody, yeah, more than even their friends, their spouses, their boyfriends, their girlfriends, their kids, is government. The only problem is how the data collected by various state and government agencies is harmonized and coordinated. Because, for example, even if you don't tell your spouse that you have recently bought a piece of land somewhere, government knows. Yeah, if you have disposed a certain asset somewhere, government knows. Yeah, if you bought shares in a certain company somewhere, government knows. So there's a lot of data going around that really needs to be harmonized. Now, on the issue of who should collect this data, it's a very dicey situation. Why? Because we have very many government bodies, right, that execute very different mandates, which sometimes due to operational needs and governance and the need to maintain the separation of powers and independence of bodies, they can be combined. Each one of them does their own thing and requires you to submit, data routinely if you require services from them. I think that's where the issue of redundancy comes, yeah, because somebody is asking you your phone number, where you live. So, for example, if you want to start up a business and you're applying for all these licenses and approvals and permits from everybody, you find yourself repeating the same set of information throughout. So the trick is some form of what can I call it, cooperation between the levels of government. And for me, where I stand, from where I sit, from a policy, administrative, and legal standpoint, I don't really think we would really need to have a law. Yeah, and I'm saying this due to experience from other jurisdictions. For example, let me give you a situation. In the U.S., when they had a lot of terror attacks, especially after the 9/11 and other domestic issues, where they found they were having criminal gangs who are using very sophisticated weapons over time, and the police were quite overwhelmed in addressing these people, because you find like white supremacists, you find jihadists, you find who. It became very necessary for the police to up their game. And this is what brought about the SWAT teams. I think maybe if people can Google the history of SWAT teams, there is where they came from. Actually, it required, it was formulated in such a way that an MOU had to be entered between, surprisingly, the Department of Defense of the US and the Department of Justice. essentially the entire police force of the US falls under the Department of Justice, the FBI's, the WHO's, and the US military falls under the Department of Defense. So the two departments, being state departments, federal department of the US, before then could not cooperate, yeah, because there was no framework. And the guys had to come up with a cooperation framework, and they signed MOUs. And I believe even in Kenya, we should do two things, essentially. There should be a central database from which the government can literally pull out your CV, right? From the date you are born, all the civil documents you have been issued with throughout time, where you live, and if it goes the US way, they even actually have details of where you even work, right? So that if you go and approach a certain government entity, they don't need to ask you a lot of questions. Maybe they may need to ask you that little question that completes their own records. Otherwise, the rest of the entire records, they have them with them. And it's possible. I think other countries have done it. The US has done it. So if you have that kind of cooperation, it's good. This cooperation does two things. Number one, it improves service delivery. It reduces the kind of the contact hours that you have to have, filling out registration forms and etc. So if you just give guys your name or your ID number, the rest of the details just come up, right? It also improves another very critical sector, security, law and order of the country. The government should be able to know who are these citizens, yeah? Just as the way the financial institutions have to know their client, KYCs, even the government has to know their citizens, yeah? So that if you tell maybe a security agent that my name, for example, my name is Richard Maina, yeah? And they just go to that super database, they can actually pick a lot of information about me and cross-check whatever information I'm giving them. Yeah.
With your permission, I want to ask a question around what he's talking about. There's been a little development, let me put it that way, in the right way. And some of this sharing of information can go a long way with reducing corruption. This is the way I see it. The government recently started developing Huduma centers. We all have heard about Huduma centers. It's a central repository where information can be gathered in one spot. You sit on a chair. When you stand up, you can get all the licenses you need to get. You can get your birth certificate. You can get all those things. It is a good point. First, to avoid too much face-to-face interaction with people, because it is when I'm sitting in front of you that you have the opportunity to ask me for something. If I don't sit in front of you, you don't have that opportunity. So online platforms help, okay? But that's part of the information we have to give away so that we can use them. But when you go ahead and say about collaboration, this generally is a country that came out from the rural areas. So a lot of people, Nairobi is the epicenter of economics, let me put it that way. Farmers sell here and buy their raw materials here and things like that. If you come to Nairobi and, for example, he registers deaths and births. There's a child born in Nairobi. Then you go home to the village. Then you're told, come after 3 weeks for your birth certificate. You come back. You cannot call. You cannot access information anywhere. You come to Nairobi all the way. Then they tell you, oh, Hayuanekani, come back after 1 month. You have to go away and come back. Not only is it expensive for you, but it is also very inefficient and time-consuming. We want to be able to have a situation where information is available online. When your birth certificate is ready, you get a notification that it's ready, come and collect. Or even it's mailed to you if we have secure systems. I don't know if we are heading in that direction for those people who are in those areas. I don't know if we're heading, but Huduma Center for me has been one positive platform. That's there. When you go in Nairobi right now, parking, I don't have to look at that guy in the yellow jacket, because those guys had developed systems where they just disappear when you're parking. And then you have to look for him, and you are in a hurry, you go away, and then they come and clamp you just as you go away. So I can pay for my parking without necessarily meeting somebody. Can we have this platform so our information is available? I don't have to give it again to somebody else, okay? If I go to the office where I'm today, we want to pay for a piece of land, the same KRA is asking you for a PIN. And yet they're the issuers of the PIN. So they have the information. Okay, so
Thank you very much. I mean, that's a very good point you've brought there. That it usually doesn't make sense that you go to get a birth certificate from Mr. Muga, and the first thing he asks you is, what's your ID? Bring a copy of your ID. I want to believe that Mr. Muga should have the ID. By me giving him my name, it should be enough to trigger him to give me the document. Now, before we go to questions and answers, I want to ask Alice a question. Many of us, and this is a fantasy, it's a fancy every one of us have. I want to believe that many people are now on social media. Every one of us is posting a picture on Facebook here, picture on Twitter there, snapshot, is it Snapchat or short? Yeah, that, yeah. I mean, we can track someone right from Monday to Sunday, what they are doing. This guy will wake up and take morning things, sure. Then go to break morning, have morning tea and a picture here. Get to Kenya Airways or FastJet or Jumbo Jet, and you not get enough of those pictures on Facebook. Come evening, they are having dinner and you will have dinner things. My question is, that frightens me, because what risk are we exposing ourselves when we are daily now not giving information but updating on these platforms about who we are, where we are, what we are doing, who are we doing with, and I know this. What risk are we exposing ourselves into? Thank you. Can I see the... And please, if you're giving the mic, we really need to hurry up. For a question, I'm giving 1 minute to get to that gentleman.
Okay, thank you. My name's John Accoton from the Counterfeit Agency. Mine basically just to follow up on this discussion of multiplicity of data. You find that the government has various arms, and they're collecting kind of similar data since the day that you are born. Maybe you reach high school, you get an ID, and keep on moving on that. So they collect quite a lot of data. But then you find that the government does not really seem to have a kind of a mechanism of how they can use this data to stop somebody from kind of giving repeated information. If I can give an example of when you're applying, let's say, for a certificate of good conduct, you find that you go to the CID officers, to the CID office, they take your fingerprints, then probably 2 or 3 months later, if you want again a similar kind of certificate, again you do the same thing. But you find that
30 seconds. 30 seconds more.
Quickly. Yeah, so they have all this fingerprinting, which they can actually use, and they can even generate even more income from that. Then another example is the issue about voter registration. You find that the government still has also the same information. And then recently, the government was urging people to come forward and register. But you see, the government still has that information. Then how can you really ensure that this information is being utilized by the various government departments, even administratively? And then the last one is about data security. When you go now online, you remember that it is very, very easy for people to even to hack our systems. It has been done elsewhere, even in the US. How can the government ensure that people cannot hack into our systems? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more question?
Yeah, hi, my name is
I'll come
Vince
back to
Sila. Mine is more of a comment. Yeah. I'm from Data Vault Systems. I just want to say that, okay, I thank the panel for the insight that they gave us, but I think for most of us who are looking at the legal aspect, most of the stuff they talked about, except for Alan from the immigration, was stuff that you can get online pretty much. But I'm kind of disappointed that the stuff that was talked about was things that you can actually just Google and find out. We are most interested in finding out what are the legal frameworks surrounding biometric data collection by firms, companies in Kenya, but nothing really has come out from that, so that's my comment.
Thanks. Any more question? Here.
Hi, I'm Neto from Tafsiri. Two very quick points. One, I was going to disagree with Bonamaina about the government collecting information and sharing it widely. And he gave the example of the US where there are very, very strict laws about information sharing. Case in point was actually after 9/11, the issue of people being pulled over for a simple traffic offense and then being deported, because an immigration issue became quite a problem. And I think in Kenya, where your last name is enough for you to be denied service, that can be quite an issue. If someone, you go for a simple thing and then the alcohol guy sees your last name, then starts telling you, kona help, kona nini, it's just Pandora's box where, our morals are weak to begin with. So maybe we should start there before we, give out all this information. Lastly, question to you. I was just wondering, when a baby is born, for instance, in the US, you fill in your form at the hospital. They mail getting the birth certificate comes automatically. You don't have to go back to another center to fill more forms. When you want to go to the passport place, you go to one place and it's done in seconds. In a few minutes, it's done. And I had such a big problem. I got my daughter's information, everything, passport, birth certificate, everything was gotten in half a day. I tried to get a Kenyan passport. It took 3 days of going back and forth, and I said, you know what, forget it. Yes, I'm Kenyan.
Okay.
So that was the problem, and I'm just wondering why we're that inefficient when it comes to that.
Thanks. I will start with the question on Mr. Muga.
Thank you. I have one question. I think I'll answer the question relating to birth certificates and the birth registration procedures. I don't know when's the last time you made an application for a birth certificate, but I think there's a lot of progress that government is making on the service delivery front. Perhaps, unfortunately, not as much as is known to the public. I could have joined Wangela in this presentation on NTSA because it is only NTSA passports application and birth certificate applications that you can apply for as we speak through the e-citizen portal. The government is currently piloting Nairobi, the process of issuance of birth certificates in Nairobi sub-county through the e-citizen portal. And well, what the e-citizen portal simply means is that you have a one-stop shop, if you will, in the process of applying for a birth certificate. You make the application in the comfort of your, of your home or your office, pay for it online, collect the birth certificate from the office in which, the sub-county in which that birth actually occurred. In the background, there's a lot of, there's actually a digitization process that has taken place where all the historical records in the department have been digitized and are now accessible through a web-based system. And what that means is that you can actually apply for a birth certificate from a register that has been digitalized from anywhere in the country because that record is available and accessible online. So perhaps the problem is that there's not as much information about the progress that we're making on the service delivery front as there actually is. Maybe we need to work on that, but I think it's also important to note the timelines. At some point, we were issuing birth certificates in 14 days of application. We came down to 7 days. Right now, in offices outside of Nairobi, you can get that a birth certificate on the same day. In fact, you walk in and walk out with the birth certificate. And I would like to assume that that applies for other, citizen-facing services as well that government is offering. So there is some progress that is, being made. Perhaps there's one or two things that we need to do to work on the business processes, but indeed there is some progress. Thank you.
Thank you. We so much time has really flown. I'm going to give each one of our panelists a minute to close down on. Do we? We don't have time. Sorry. Thank you. As we come to the close of our discussion, two things have been very clear. Is that Government, as we all know, is a very is a complex organization, and it is as complex as you can think. It is as complex as starting from the chief all the way going to the president and all the protocols and procedures you have to follow. And with ICT is coming to help in automation. And with the introduction of automation, we have a lot of things happening. We have electronic payments, we have our data being collected electronically, and we have facilities like e-citizen and Huduma centers doing all manner of things to make our life bearable and for us to interact with the government. And the government, as you can see from the conversation that is going on in this forum, is that it is ready to interact with its citizen. But the big question in the room is, how secure are we from the data that we give, and how can we break the complexity in the government in terms of data and information and stop the duplication? I mean, I guess that's a conversation we'll have to go on with until such a time when we will all come to par and be able to push this forward. Thank you very much for coming for this session, and we really appreciate from me and my fellow colleagues. Thank you, and enjoy Mombasa.